Most people think they know Tupac, the music, the interviews, the controversies. But what if I told you one of the most interesting stories about him isn't something you've ever seen on camera? It's a story told by someone who was actually there, and even he didn't fully understand what was happening at the time. Because this wasn't just another night, something about it felt different. And once you hear it, you'll understand why people still talk about it today. What?
You met Tupac, right?
Tupac was I remember it was two things happened with Tupac. Jake Steed, he was rapping, he was doing his thing, and he said something about Pac wants to meet you. And because I would see him in passing, from set, whatever. And I knew a girl that was seeing him, so I hit her up and I said, yo, I hear that Pac wants to meet me. And she was like, well, let me find out. Because she was with him. And she knew everybody. Soul Train dancer. She knew that world. And she hit me back later that day. She said, yeah, Pac said, yeah, he wants to meet you and to give you his number. And at the time, everybody was using pagers. We were paging, I'd page you and you called me back at the number I paged you from. And so I had his number to page him.
Back in the mid-90s, Tupac wasn't just a rapper, he was a force. Fresh out of prison, back in Los Angeles, and moving fast through every circle that mattered. At the same time, Mr. Marcus was building his own name, different industry, same city. And somehow, their worlds were about to collide, not by accident, but because Tupac had already been watching quietly, from a distance.
And I thought I was geeked out because I was a Pac fan because I just started being on my own, like in the world, like with my homeboys and trying to figure out what I was gonna do in life. And I had started, when I got into the porn industry, I was like, I think I met him, this was 2 years in, this was in 96. So I'd already been making movies and I was busy. And he was like, had been watching shit because we were making noise. We were, it was LA, it was 94, 95. I mean, Pac gets out of prison end of 95. And, and what happens is you see movies in prison, not movies, but you see pictures and magazines. So everything that I was shooting was going into magazines, and those magazines were going straight to the prisons. So the brothers were like sharing that shit. And I feel like that's probably when he first got introduced to me, was through the magazines.
Think about that for a second. Before they ever met, Tupac already knew who he was. Through magazines, through word of mouth, through the culture itself. That's how powerful Pac's awareness was. He didn't just move in music, he moved across entire industries. And when he decided he wanted to meet someone, and that meeting was going to happen.
He had, and I found this out through Ron Hightower. Ron Hightower directed How Do You Want It? How Do You Want It with Casey and JoJo. And Ron had met Tupac. He went to the, I think it was the BET Awards or some kind of award show that was down at the Santa Monica airport. And when he was there, Pac was going through like the red carpet or something, and Ron was there. And Ron knew like cats because Ron was from New York, and Ron was shooting a series called Dark Alley, and Dark Alley was all black. It was like, it was some hood shit that cats loved. It was, it was dope shit. And so people knew who Ron was because of that. And I think he said him and Pac kind of met and exchanged numbers, and then Pac was like, I want to hang out with you because you got all the females. So Pac ended up hanging out with Ron first. The first celebrity I ever met was Bushwick Bill, and I was at Ron's house. And I used to shoot for Ron when I first got started. So Pac was familiar with the porn industry. As a fan, as being out here in LA, and just through chance meetings. And so when I heard he wanted to meet me and I got his pager number, all of that I didn't know none of that part. Found out later. all I knew was I had grown. I was around homeboys that loved Pac and respected him, and that's all we listened to was Tupac. So I thought here was my chance to meet, a legend, and I ended up paging him.
Now here's where things start to shift, because for Mr. Marcus, this wasn't just another meeting. This was Tupac, a figure he grew up respecting, listening to, looking up to. So when the chance finally came, he didn't hesitate. He locked in a time, a place, and unknowingly set the stage for a night he would never forget.
And we, I was calling from a payphone, and we were like, all right, we're gonna meet up. I was like, when's a good time? He says, we made it out over a week where I was having a casting call at my agent's office. And I said, this day I knew we was gonna have this casting call. So I told him to meet me at El Torito, this is in Sherman Oaks, on this date and this time. Because the casting call was gonna go from like noon, like 11 till like 2, 3 in the afternoon. Or maybe noon to 3, something like that. And so Pac, he was like, cool, I'll meet you. And during the course of the week, I would page him from different phone numbers just to show people, that I knew him. So I was at a barbershop and I paged him. And he called back to the barbershop and he was like, yo, Tupac's on the phone. I was like, oh yeah, that's for me. So I was like that. I was, I was looking forward to meeting this dude, but I was like geeked out that I was meeting this dude.
But he didn't go alone. He brought people with him. 3 women, each with their own presence, their own energy, and one of them in particular would end up playing a much bigger role than anyone expected, because when Tupac walked into that room, everything changed.
And so when I met him, the day I met him, we had the casting call. So it was all these male, female models that want to get work. They go to your agent, he's got producers, directors there. So I'm there as a producer and I'm meeting girls, and there's girls that I know. And so I'll tell them, we're going to go meet Pac after this. So the girls are like, hell yeah. And it was Obsession, a girl by the name of Obsession, Obsession's friend, and then another girl that was like kind of like a performer, not well known as Obsession. So the 3 of us leave my office and go to El Torito. And we get a booth in El Torito, and Pac's on his way. And we're sitting at the booth, and then comes Pac, comes around the corner, and he's got these 2 dudes walking behind him in suits. And they go and sit at a booth, and Pac comes to sit in our booth. And Pac is like excited. He's like, I got 3 females. I'm thinking I'm the man. Cause I got 3 females and I got Pac, so I'm thinking I'm the man. Pac sits down, he starts immediately, flirting with Obsession, and which was cool because I loved Obsession. I'm not a hater, I wasn't tripping. I was just more like, I'm glad that they're getting along. And Pac, we had 1 round of drinks, and Pac says, "Let's go back to the studio."
This is where the story takes a turn, because what seemed like a casual meetup instantly became something else. Tupac walks in, confident, focused, already reading the room, and within minutes he shifts the entire plan. No long dinner, no staying in one place. Instead, he says one thing, let's go to the studio. And just like that, the night moves to the next level.
And I'm like, cool, because I cleared the whole schedule. I was, I thought we were gonna be at El Torito. That's where my mind was at. we gonna get some enchiladas. We gonna get some El Pastor. we gonna eat some street corn. We ain't going nowhere. We chilling here at El Torito. And Pac was like, nah, we going to the studio. So he gets up and we go outside, and I had this little BMW 318 with fake leather, and I thought I was the shit. This was in '96, so I had a little BMW, and I was like, and Pac and out parked like in the front of El Torito was this wagon, the station wagon, looked like 78, 79. Wood paneling all on the side of it. could have been a Chevy. I can't think of what the name of it is, but it looked like a spaceship. And I thought when I walked outside, I was thinking, oh, he has to drive that because he's got to drive around the 2 security dudes. I pictured him driving it. I pictured them dudes sitting in the car, and they were all in this station wagon. And Pac must have read my mind because he walks over to the station wagon and he grabs the handle and he goes to lift it and he stops and he turns and looks at me and starts laughing. And I'm like, what's going on? And then he's like, come on. And he looks at Obsession and says, you come with me. And he walks around the car over to a black 500 SL, Mercedes SL convertible. Brand new, glistening in the sun. Look like a black stallion. He takes Obsession and hops in the car, and he says, "Follow me." And security hopped in another car, and I go and hop in my little BMW 318, and I'm trying to keep up with Pac, who's flying down Ventura Boulevard, heading towards Winnetka, and he is flying, and Obsession's hair is blowing in the wind. Tupac's just laughing, and and I'm sitting there in my little 318 trying to keep up. And that was it. That's how we met. That was my first impression. That was my moment.
That moment right there. That's the reality check. Because it wasn't just about meeting Tupac, it was about understanding who he really was. The presence, the control, the way he moved, even the smallest details, like the cars, the decisions, the pace. Everything about it said one thing: he was operating on a completely different level, and the night was just getting started.
That was my reality check, to be honest with you. That was my reality check. And we ended up going back to the studio that night. We get there, somebody brings out a big Tupperware bowl of weed. So he starts rolling blunts. Alizé and Christoph, his Thug Passion was his big thing. So Alizé was big, so they brought that out. They brought out the Christoph. I think it was Christoph. It was Alizé and something else. It was Hennessy, maybe? Alizé and Hennessy? Thug Passion. Whatever they were doing, they started mixing drinks. So Pac is rolling joints. Now the joints, Johnny J was in there playing music. They had these little DATs, D-A-T. So Johnny J was plugging in, playing different tracks. Pac was listening. And then he told him to hold on, play that one. And Johnny J would play the song over and over again. Pac put out a yellow tab, yellow notepad, started writing. And he says, anybody who wants to be on this with me has to be finished by the time I get done recording my verse. And I just remember looking around the room, and the Dog Pound came through. Snoop was on trial for murder at that time. Suge and Snoop came in later, but in the room, Dog Pound was there, Johnny J was there, and my girls, the 3 girls that I brought, Obsession and the 2 friends were all there. One of the girls was a rapper, that Obsession's friend. And so she starts writing. And Pac, he writes his shit and goes in there and he records. He does the one take. And then he does another take, kind of punching in everything. And then the third take is just just to make sure his verse is all set. Comes out of the booth and he says, "Who's next?"
Now we're inside the studio, and this is where you see a different side of Tupac. Not the public figure, not the headlines, but the creator, focused, fast, locked into the music, writing on the spot, recording instantly, and pushing everyone around him to match that energy. No wasted time, no hesitation, just pure output.
And he notices my homegirl is writing. He says, "Oh, you want to record too?" She's like, "Yep." He's like, you go after him. And somebody else went in and recorded. And so finally, it was her turn. And he coached her through the whole thing. He got her in the booth and she went through her verse, and he coached her step by step until she was complete. And he was like, "Cool." And I remember all of us were like, "All right, Pac was like, yo, I'm about to bounce, but I got you. I got your contacts, I got everything. And as we were leaving, Roger Troutman was in the booth recording. As I remember seeing him, I was like, damn, Roger.
This wasn't just a hangout. This was a moment inside history. Real artists, real energy, real creation happening in real time. And for the people in that room, they knew they were witnessing something rare. But what no one knew was how fast everything would change.
This was in January of 1996. So I would run into Pac throughout the year because he was going to record a video for How Do You Want It. And he did his show at the House of Blues. And so I met him before he went to the House of Blues and did the show. The night he did the show at House of Blues, I got there, but I got there late. And then he was doing How Do You Want It? And I'm not sure when he was doing that, probably June, July of that year, maybe. And maybe a little earlier than that. And I went to set for that, but I got there late. And they wanted to use me in the video, but I got there late, so I didn't get a chance to be a part of the video. He took me into his bus. He took a bunch of us in the bus, and he showed us the video for 2 of America's Most Wanted, which was dope because it hadn't been out yet. And then maybe months later, he was killed in September.
Because just months later, Tupac would be gone, and moments like this would become memories people held on to forever. Stories that suddenly meant more, stories that now carried weight, and one of those stories involved what happened after that night.
Pac was messing around with her?
Yeah, they hooked up. Pac, I think one night, I brought Obsession and another girl that I was kind of kicking it with to Pac's, because Pac, that night, I ended up going back with Pac to his hotel room, smoking a joint with him, and he was just like, okay, it's time to go, like, all right, bro. So, because I was trying to hang, and then he was like, yo, in a few days I'm gonna be in a spot in the Wilshire, on the Westwood. He had a condo, and he was like, yo, bring some people through. So I brought Obsession and another girl. And we got to the house, and he was working on the Outlaw album. He was working on all that, because Pac was super creative, and he was working on the artwork for the album for the Outlaws. And I remember coming in there chilling. It was like a big ass spot, and me and him, we were playing Mario Kart, and I ended up beating him, and he didn't want to play no more. I was playing it all the time. So when I saw it, I was like, ooh. But I ended up leaving with the girl, and Obsession ended up spending the night. I came back the next day to pick her up. And they had clicked. They were like super cool with each other. And I don't know what happened. I know, so I don't hold me to it, but I picked her up the next day and I took her back home. She never told me what happened. She never said anything. She was just like, she just had a big smile on her face. So
now this part of the story is where things become more personal, more quiet, more unspoken, because according to Mr. Marcus, after everything, the studio, the energy, the night, Tupac invited them back, not as a crowd, but as a smaller circle. And that's where things shifted again. Not into chaos, not into anything extreme, but into something more private, more selective. One of the women stayed, the others left. And what happened next was never fully explained. No details, no breakdown. Just one thing that stood out. The next day, she had a smile that said everything without saying anything at all. And maybe that's what makes this story so powerful. Not what was said, but what wasn't. Because Tupac wasn't just living fast. He was creating moments that felt bigger than life, even to the people inside them. And years later, those moments still echo, not as rumors, not as headlines, but as real experiences from people who were actually there. And maybe the truth is, we'll never fully know what happened that night, but we know enough to understand one thing: Tupac wasn't just a legend because of his music, he was a legend because of the way he lived.